So the Apocalypse is an example of Second Temple Jewish apocalyptic literature. There are many other Jewish apocalypses from the same period that help us get an idea
of the genre.
They were written by extreme Hebrew Bible nerds, like super Hebrew Bible nerds, who knew how to read, pray, and meditate on the storyline and symbols of the Hebrew Bible. And in their own experiences of prayer and meditation and altered states of consciousness, they made all kinds of connections, had encounters with God's presence, and the Spirit of God showed them new ways to mold all the symbols together, to give new insight and wisdom for future generations of God's people. And we have a Messianic Christian example. So a Jewish follower of Jesus who was a super Hebrew Bible nerd, crazy Hebrew Bible nerd. He begins by framing the book as a message that Jesus wants to give to 7 churches.
They're all related. They all fit together. Again, if you can take the bird's eye view and look down and look where John is drawing all this stuff, and the key here is the Babylon. The key here is the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. And then the imagery makes sense, and the end game makes sense. The ultimate conflict, as the players are taking sides, they make sense.
Welcome to another episode of Ring Them Bells. We believe in the power of the good news and that Jesus has defeated evil and is king of our world. We exist to help you rediscover the supernatural focus of your Bible. We believe that the supernatural focus has been suppressed, and we're here to help bring that back into the light. We do that through incredible content creation. We have mashups and interviews with some of the best scholars featuring N.T. Wright, Tim Mackey of the Bible Project, and Dr. Michael Heiser. All of this content creation supports our nonprofit ministry here at Ring Them Bells, where we provide pop-up feeding centers for the homeless and also specialize in hurricane relief. If you haven't yet, please take a second. It only takes a moment for you, but means so much for this ministry. Subscribe and turn on the alerts, as this is the best way to connect with our channel. Who is the beast in Revelation? What is the mark of the beast? The book of the Revelation is one of the most misunderstood books of the Bible. People constantly misuse the book as some sort of prophecy to decode the current events happening. Today, we are going to help set the record straight. Using the Hebrew narrative of Scripture, we are going to trace how the story shows that behind the scenes of the nations and empires are rebellious, supernatural beings bent on breaking humanity and bringing us back into chaos. Dr. Michael Heiser has helped me and many recover the supernatural framework of the Bible through the divine counsel worldview. The key to understanding the book of the Revelation, the mark of the beast, and the identity of all these mysterious themes lies within where God allotted the nations to members of his divine counsel. Members of his council who would later rebel and seek to use empire to bring about the destruction of man. Who is the beast? What is the mark of the beast? As always, the answers to our questions must be found by starting at Genesis. Stay tuned, my friends. The beginning is near.
So let's start in the beginning. In Genesis 1, God creates a beautiful, ordered reality out of darkness and disorder so that life can flourish. He appoints humans as his representatives to rule over all of it, and 7 times God calls it good.
Yeah, I experience that kind of goodness often in the world, in things like beauty and truth, love and generosity.
But in Genesis 3, we meet a creature who's in a state of rebellion against his creator. We're not told yet why or how he rebels, but he's on a mission to ruin God's good world for other creatures.
This thing is trouble.
Yeah, this creature is the Bible's first portrait of evil. It distorts what God has purposed for good, ruining and dragging creation back into darkness and disorder.
So the humans join the spiritual rebel, which leads them back into chaos and death.
And from this point on, the human rebellion is interwoven with a spiritual rebellion. And the biblical story shows how this happens over and over again.
Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top reaches to the heavens. And Yahweh said, Come, let us go down and confuse their language there, so that they will not understand each other's language. Therefore, its name was called Babel.
Now, this is a really familiar story. Less familiar is how the story is told in Deuteronomy.
When the Most High apportioned the nations, at his dividing up the sons of humankind, he fixed the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. For Yahweh's portion was his people, Jacob the share of his inheritance.
When was humanity divided into nations? That was at Babel. God allotted the nations to the members of his divine council. The Bible says this is why the ancient nations worshipped other gods. God decided to let the members of his divine council govern the other nations in response to humanity's rebellion at Babel.
But the gods of the nations failed to rule justly. God chastises them in Psalm 82.
God stands in the divine assembly. He administers judgment in the midst of the gods. How long will you judge unjustly and show favoritism to the wicked?
Then God pronounces a judgment on them.
I have said, you are gods and sons of the Most High, all of you. However, you will die like men, and you will fall like one of the princes.
The gods will be judged, punished, and will die. It's startling to read these things. God is so angry with his corrupt heavenly sons that he condemns them. Some passages in the prophets place the fulfillment of this punishment in the end times at the day of the Lord.
For the anger of Yahweh is against all the nations, and his wrath is against all their host. All the host of heaven shall rot. All their host shall wither. On that day, Yahweh will punish the host of heaven in heaven, and the kings of the earth on the
God
earth.
of the Bible wants to share authority with others.
Oh, right. God shares his rule with human partners on earth. And so, in the same way, there's a parallel story of God sharing his authority to rule with spiritual partners.
Yes, that is, until it all falls apart in a twin rebellion. So you have humans who want to rule on earth on their own terms. So they start building their own nation using their own definitions of good and evil.
Yeah, the famous story of the building of Babylon.
But check this out. When biblical authors like Moses or Isaiah looked back at the origins of Babylon, they saw more than just a human rebellion, but also a spiritual rebellion.
What was this spiritual rebellion?
Well, there were members of the divine council who, like the humans, didn't want to represent God's authority anymore. They wanted to be God, and they rebelled. And so these created beings deceived humans into worshiping them instead of the Creator. And so Babylon becomes the biblical image for the combined human and spiritual rebellion.
And so God scatters the people from Babylon into different nations.
And in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses says this is when God also scattered the rebels of the divine council with them.
So the nations are handed over to spiritual rulers.
Yes, and this is why when the biblical prophets look out at the violent empires of their day, they see two dimensions to all the chaos and injustice. Human rebels who are being corrupted by the worship of spiritual rebels, the idol gods of money, sex, and military power.
Yeah, when humans give their allegiance to these powers, it leads to a world like ours.
Okay, now we have the Hebrew narrative straightened out. The Tower of Babel, as seen through the Divine Council worldview, lets us know that each and every nation and empire of the world is ruled by the same supernatural evil as the snake in the garden. It's this dual vision of seeing corrupt heavenly rulers deceiving and engaging with the corrupt nations and empires of the world. It's almost as if the Hebrew scriptures are like X-ray goggles, that when we put them on, we can see this double-layered reality that is constantly working throughout our world. Now, as we take all of this context and information into the book of Revelation, we are going to dive deep into discovering what the author was actually talking about when he references the beast or the mark of the beast. Remember, the Bible is a unified story, and John, the author of Revelation, intimately wove all these ancient supernatural threads into this apocalyptic vision. Who is the beast of Revelation? What is the mark of the beast? Let's explore the answer together. And to that point, we were just talking about is seeing it as Rome. As we move into understanding Revelation as speaking a political witness against empire, that's what I just is so important for people that are watching this. Like that, instead of seeing it as this future text and code, like it's speaking a political witness against empire. I wanted to dive into a controversial Christian topic coming out of the book of Revelation called the mark of the beast. So 666 has long been misunderstood as some future forecast on specifics. I put out this exact video and had somebody on Facebook send me over some prediction of what they thought the mark was of something. And I just want to watch this short clip because I think it's important, and if we can get anybody to kind of see this side of it, I think it'll be valuable. So let's watch this and then discuss.
Signs. The word literally means symbols, and these chapters are full of them. These visions explore the message of the open scroll in greater depth. The first one reveals the cosmic spiritual battle that lay behind the suffering of the seven churches under Roman persecution. It's a manifestation of that ancient conflict that began in Genesis chapter 3. The serpent, who represents the source of all evil, is depicted here as a dragon. It attacks a woman and her seed. They represent the Messiah and his people. Then the Messiah defeats the dragon through his death and resurrection, and it's cast to earth. There, the dragon inspires hatred and persecution of the Messiah's people. But they will conquer the dragon by resisting his influence, even if it kills them. John's trying to show the churches that neither Rome nor any other nation or human is the real enemy. There are dark spiritual powers at work, and Jesus' followers will announce Jesus' victory by remaining faithful and loving their enemies just like the slain lamb. John's next vision retells the story of the same conflict, but this time in the earthly symbolism of Daniel's animal visions. John sees two beasts empowered by the dragon. One of them represents national military power that conquers through violence. The other beast symbolizes the economic propaganda machine that exalts this power as divine. And these beasts demand full allegiance from the nations, and that's symbolized by taking the mark of the beast and his number, 666, on the forehead or hand. Now, this is an infamous image, and you won't discover its meaning by reading news headlines. John's making a clear Hebrew Old Testament reference here. First of all, this mark is the anti-Shema. The writing on the forehead and hand, it's a clear reference to the Shema, an ancient Jewish prayer of allegiance to God that's found in the book of Deuteronomy. This prayer also was written on the forehead and hand as a symbol of devoting all your thoughts and actions to the one true God. But now the rebellious nations demand their own allegiance, and they force everyone to decide who they will follow. Then there's the number of the beast, which has fascinated readers for thousands of years. But this was not a mystery to John. He spoke Hebrew and Greek, and Hebrew letters were also numbers. If you spell the Greek words Nero Caesar and the word beast in Hebrew, each one amounts to 666. Now, John isn't saying that Nero was the only fulfillment of this vision. Nero's just a recent example of the ancient pattern set out by Daniel, that the nations become beasts when they exalt their own power and economic security as a false god and then demand total allegiance. So Babylon was the beast in Daniel's day, but that was followed by Persia, followed by Greece, and now Rome in John's day. And so it goes for any later nation that acts in the same way.
In verse 18, this calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for its number, it is the number of a man, and his number 666. Okay, we know that. My commentary here talks about how, and I know sometimes we've said, well, 666 is kind of like the, it's the less than 777, the perfection. But I have in my commentary here, it says, the invitation to one with understanding to calculate this number, however, suggests the use of Gematria, I guess that's the way you say that, an ancient code using the numerical values of letters, both beast and Nero Caesar, written in Hebrew characters, add up to 666. Many interpreters expect a future greater fulfillment. So my question around this is, what does this really mean when it says to calculate the number? Is this something that we should be doing for the future? Did this already happen? You know, or is it one of those already but not yet?
The thing. Let's talk about the thing with Nero first. I know. You instigator, you. It depends on the way you spell Nero's name, which actually gets different spellings in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Latin. And Nero has been a popular candidate for the Antichrist, not only because with one of those that you just mentioned, you can calculate the number of his name. By the way, Gematria is the practice, and lots of languages used it, where you would take the letters of the alphabet. Like the first 10 letters of the alphabet in Hebrew are numbers 1 through 10. You assign numbers to the letters of the alphabet, and so on and so forth for all your alphabetic numbers. And then when you see a name or a phrase, you can do the math. You can just put the numerical equivalents in there and you come out with a number, and it may mean something or may not. But with Nero, he's a popular candidate because there are some manuscripts of Revelation 13:18 that do not read 666. They read 616. Let me see if ESV has done its job here. Look at that. Some manuscripts 616. So I don't know the editor here, but good job, whoever you were. But Nero, again, if you pick one of the alternate spellings for Nero, you can get his name to match 616 as well. So he's like a favorite candidate. But a lot of scholars feel that it's kind of cheating to just pick your language and get your name, you know? Like that's essentially what you're doing. You know, other commentators like Beale will make the comment that you can take this phrase number of a man and you could translate it human number. And then that takes you down the other road that you mentioned about the significance of a number less than 777. Okay, and 888 is Jesus, 777 is God. And I mean, there were different numbers that meant, you know, a standard of holiness or perfection. And if you're thinking, you know, these people were just crazy. I mean, first we get this astronomy stuff, and now all this number symbolism. Okay, they were serious about this in the first century because they had different reasons, but some wanted to encrypt ideas into names and numbers for their own safety. There's some speculation that Revelation does some of that. If you think especially that Revelation is a book that was written before the destruction of the temple, and it's a polemic on Rome, even if you don't have to be a preterist and think it's all fulfilled, you can still be something of a futurist. But if you think that there are things in the book that are directed against the emperor and the Romans, yeah, you would probably encrypt that rather than just put it in the text and then take the consequences. You know, the Romans are knocking at your door the next day. So there's a certain logic to it, and it was used for secrecy. Some of it was esoteric, mystical thinking, you know, trying to communicate theological ideas with numbers and stuff like that.
So the point is that these churches, communities of Jesus, are facing the forces of the Satan, the devil, and he's trying to inspire them with a vision of reality where Jesus is the real victor and cosmic king. And that brings us to the next key part of the book was in chapters 4 and 5, which is all about a vision of the heavenly temple that's inspired by all of the same visions from the Hebrew Bible. But the God figure on the throne has a scroll that unlocks all the mysteries of history and God's purpose, and no one can open it. It's like, who can understand what God has in store? Where's God taking the show? And then this lamb shows up with its throat slit, but it's called the Lion from the tribe of Judah, and it's a symbol of the risen Jesus. And the lamb can take the scroll and open it up. And so it's a vision that the real cosmic king is this crucified, risen Jesus on the divine throne. That he's the one directing history towards its purpose, not the Satan who's hijacked human history with the power of the dragon. And really, just chapter 12 is where we want to focus, because for the first time, John introduces the figure of the dragon here in chapter 12. And the dragon's going to play a role and be on the scene until he's escorted off the stage in chapter 20. Now, whether or not he's a new character, because he's already introduced
The Satan
in the letters to the 7 churches. Now, so this is key, because in the sequence of 7 things that he sees, he's going to actually see 2 more monsters.
Oh, okay.
Actually, so this will be, the first is he sees a big red dragon, 7 heads, 10 horns, 7 crowns on its heads. Let's pause. This thing, when we turn to chapter 13, we meet and see this. And the dragon stood on the sand of the sea shore.
That's his domain. So he's at the border.
This is the border. And I saw a beast coming up out of the sea,
Oh, another beast.
having 10 horns and 7 heads.
Oh,
And on its horns were 10 crowns, and on his heads were blasphemous names. The beast I saw was like a leopard, but with feet like a bear, and his mouth like a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and throne and authority.
okay. So we're dealing with multiple beasts like Daniel.
Mm-hmm. So note, there's only one dragon,
Mm.
and this dragon gives power to this monster. It's like his doppelganger.
Yeah, sidekick.
Yeah. So it's sort of like the dragon was in the heavens,
Mm.
and now here's an earthly mirror,
Mm.
the corresponding earthly beast, so to speak. And this thing gets its power from the dragon. And it's like the dragon. It also has 7 heads and 10 horns and crowns. But then it's also clearly a earth creature. And look, he alludes to the animals of Daniel's dreams. Leopard, It's like a bear, it's like a lion. So he's almost certainly referring here to the actual, like, human Rome or Jerusalem or something else, depending on your meta view of how to interpret the Revelation. An earthly kingdom.
Earthly kingdom.
That's an earthly human manifestation.
And so was Daniel.
Exactly. Actually, the beasts of Daniel's dreams were called human kings and kingdoms.
Okay.
That's right. Yep. But what John has done is he's actually split out the dragon
Yeah. From
as
the.
a spiritual being,
Mm.
and then the beast, which is its earthly, imperial, institutional
Yeah,
kind of
because
manifestation.
in Daniel's vision of the 4 beasts, none were a dragon, actually.
Correct. That's exactly right.
We were just
Yeah.
kind of, because they came out of the sea, we were saying, okay, this is a way to imagine
Yeah.
the dragon. And
Yeah.
I started to think of like, okay, we're imagining the dragon, but we're like turning up and just like
Yeah.
mixing and making even a monster more chaotic than a dragon
Mm-hmm.
to just play up like this thing has gotten real out of hand.
That's right. Yeah.
And what you're saying is, okay, so we've got that, but now let's imagine that there is a dragon, but he's not coming out of the sea. Like he's so in league with
Mm-hmm.
spiritual
heavens.
beings. He's in the heavens.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's giving the sea dragon its power.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to create the
Yep.
meta frame here.
Yeah.
We've got the dragon in the beginning in the sea. It just represents death.
Yep. Yep.
And Daniel, we got the beast coming out of the chaotic ocean, which you think, oh, here's the dragon. But actually, they're human kingdoms that are beastly
Yeah,
kingdoms.
That's right.
Okay.
Monster-like. Yep.
And what gives those things their power?
Yeah.
Well, it's the dragon.
It's the snake that is a spiritual being that has put on the dragon as
Put
a
on
costume.
the dragon. Okay.
So this,
Crystal clear.
well, but it kind of is. In other words, John, he's a Bible nerd. So he can see that there's a snake that puts on and using the guise of the dragon and its power of death to deceive the humans into forfeiting their rule over the land
Yeah.
and giving their imaginations and their future to the snake. And now the snake rules them outside of Eden. And that's what Daniel is drawing on. Then remember the Cain and Abel narrative, which was about how the snake then works in the imagination of Cain. If God exalts my brother, that mean I'll never be exalted. And then he uses the power of the dragon to kill his brother to get what he wants. So now humans are ruled by the power of the dragon's persuasion, so to speak. And then Cain goes on, he builds a city and becomes the founder of the city of man and their kingdoms. And so now we have human kingdoms inspired by the power of the snake. When Daniel's monsters come up later out of the ocean, he's mostly thinking about the Cain-like human monsters, which is why they're identified as kings.
I see.
In Daniel 7. Daniel doesn't really highlight the spiritual mirror of the ruler in heaven. That's, get to Isaiah, Ezekiel develops that. And John has created one account where they are now all together.
Got it.
So there's a dragon in the heavens, and then there's monsters on the earth, and they mirror each other in strange ways.
Yeah.
But the ones on the earth are not dragons, they're just beasts.
Yeah.
And the ones in the heavens is not a beast, it's a dragon.
Okay, cool.
But they mirror each other. So, and
it is surprisingly clear.
yeah. Once you get the symbols.
Yeah.
But he's referring to people giving their allegiance to human power structures, and then who is able to wage war like him. So if we go with the Roman Empire actually conceived and described itself as a manifestation of the goddess Roma's power on the land, and it was deified, which is why you swear allegiance to it. It's why you die for it. It's why you worship Roma and therefore the Roman Empire. And so what John sees is just a huge death beast that just chews up humans and spits them out.
Yeah.
And it's inspired by the dragon. And if you give your allegiance to the beast, you're actually giving your allegiance to the dragon above.
Yeah.
That's how he sees it.
The mirror.
Yeah. But we're not done, because that's just one aspect of the earth beast.
Okay.
There's, verse 11, another beast coming up out of the earth. So the first one came out of the sea.
Beast part 2.
Yeah, this is coming up out of the underworld.
Oh, okay.
And he had 2 horns like a lamb. You're like, oh, like a little lamb growing horns.
Yeah. That's kind of like the typical way we think of Satan's head.
Yeah, that's right. The goat.
The goat
Yeah,
horns.
the goat horns. Yeah, totally. So he had 2 horns like a lamb, but he spoke like a dragon. And this is verse 12, he uses all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and he makes everybody worship the first beast. He does signs and wonders and so on. So what many people think is what John is doing is he's splitting out the military power of this whatever empire he's describing, that's animated by the dragon. And then also the economic and propaganda machine. This is the beast that makes everybody take the mark of the beast.
Oh, the second beast.
Yes.
The beast of the earth.
Yep, 666 on their hands and foreheads and so on.
So one interpretation is this is the same beast depicted as 2 different beasts.
Yeah.
The same reality depicted as 2 beasts.
Yeah, one out of the chaos sea and then one up out of the grave or out of the underworld.
Both 2 ways to think about human power structures that have gone awry.
Yeah, and both animated by the dragon.
Both are
one
animated by
speaks like a dragon.
Yeah.
One is given its power by the dragon.
Yeah.
So now you have 3 monsters, but they're all connected as this unholy trinity. And that's another surely part of the reason why he has broken into 3 is as an anti-trinity from Father, Son, and Spirit. But I just wanted to show how the dragon also has
the counterparts,
the earthly counterparts, and why broken into 2 because of the unholy trinity.
Yeah.
So Scott McKnight referenced Rome and the distinct imagery of the 7 hills, corresponding that to Rome. So Shane, respond to that clip. Help us understand how specifically trying to pinpoint who the beast is and what exactly the mark will be misses the entire political witness that the book of Revelation speaks against empire.
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, sorry, I was hesitating in my mind because, so the way that the image functions in Revelation 13, 16 through 18, I even have a little bit of a pushback against some of the scholars of Revelation on even the Caesar Nero. I'm not as compelled by that. The very first time that was mentioned was in the 1800s by 4 independent German scholars We have one reference to the potential of it being Nero from a 6th century document called the Liber Genealogus, but it actually wasn't even using the same methodology to come up with Caesar's name, Nero's name. Part of my hesitation with it being Caesar Nero is I'm like, I don't know why in a cipher John would call him Caesar, like king. I don't. That seems to be a weird
Yeah.
a weird thing, especially because I also think Revelation's written under Domitian, and I understand the idea of the Nero Redivivus and all this stuff. And if your listeners don't know exactly what I'm talking about, if you read anything by scholars on Revelation 13, everything I'm saying, that's all they're talking about.
Yeah.
I'm much more compelled by that second option that they put in that video, Therion, beast. And I'm compelled by it for a couple of reasons. Number one, and I'm gonna get a little bit more technical before I get non-technical. There is a third, fourth century fragment, Pyaxirhynchus, I believe it's 113. So it's a manuscript fragment that actually holds an early translation of Revelation that says 616. And the 2nd century church father, Irenaeus, brings that up in Book 5 of Against Heresies, where some people believe in this 616.
Wow.
And so the question then becomes, okay, from a textual critical standpoint, I actually have an article of a guy argued, based on textual critical principles, 616 would be more preferred as the original reading than 666. I don't agree with him. But the reason why is because it's so weird. Like 666 is much more fluid. You would understand how if somebody saw 616, they're like, and they made it 666, it's much more, but you like, what's the word? Symmetrical.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make sense why you would have 666 and then a copyist would go, let's make that 616. I think that's better.
Yeah.
Especially because it's very different. You're not doing the numerals 616 or 666 the way we would do with our fingers. These letters that would be representing their numbers, they don't look the same at all.
Yeah.
So you have to be able on some level, but because it's Irenaeus, 2nd century, and Pyaxirhynchus, such an early fragment, we have to be able to have a solution for 616 as well. What they typically do with Caesar Nero is they lop off the end, because it'd be Kaiser Neron would be 666. Kaiser Nero, which if you drop off that last noon, you lose 50, and then it's 616. But it doesn't still explain the question of why, though. Why drop off that final noon? I think that beast, Therion, makes the most sense, and here's why. If you take Therion, just like they said in the Bible Project, and you take those Hebrew letters, put it into Greek, add it up, it equals 666. But in Revelation 13, 16 through 18, the closest referent to 666 is not Therion, which, again, I know I'm being super technical, which is the nominative form in Greek. It actually says Theriou, which is the genitive form of the beast or from the beast. Theriou, if you add up its letters, you take it into Hebrew, add up its letters, it equals 616. So I think the reason why this 616 tradition happened so early is because some people were missing that 666 equals beast. And they go, okay, fine. Well, then the very closest Greek word to 666 that references beast, it equals 616. So we'll make it that number in some of the traditions of the manuscripts.
Yeah.
So that's the technical. Now let me get into why that matters. Because it's not pointing to a person, it's pointing to who you belong to.
Yeah.
Do you belong to the beast and all that the beast represents? Or do you belong to the Lamb and all that the Lamb represents?
Amen.
And so this is one other area where me and the scholars, we differ just a little. I think that the beasts, while you can see Rome in the beasts, the beast imagery cannot be reduced down to Rome alone. That the beast imagery and the dragon imagery from chapter 12, which is how the video began, it forms this unholy trinity.
Yes.
That is behind the prostitute, but different than the prostitute at the exact same time. And so where do I get that? Well, if you trace the beast imagery throughout the book of Revelation, in chapter 17, the prostitute, who is the one who sits on 7 hills, this is Rome, the prostitute sits astride the beast. She's sitting on the beast. And then at the end of 17, she is murdered by the beast. She is dead, but the beast keeps living. The beast is not disposed of
Wow.
until chapter 19, 11 through 21.
Yeah.
So it tells me they are intimately related, but they are not a one-to-one correlation.
Yeah.
Why is this important? Because there is this unholy trinity, the dragon and the two beasts, that use the exact same tactics, empire after empire after empire, that from deception to violence to getting you to worship them. This is Babylon.
Yeah.
This is Egypt. This is Greece. This is Rome. This is empires today. Like, this is the same formula. And this unholy trinity mocks and parodies the holy trinity of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. And in each of these trinities have their own manifestation of their will on earth through people. In Revelation, it's the New Jerusalem and Babylon, or it's the bride of Christ and it's the prostitute, the whore of Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
These people are a manifestation of the trinities, but the trinities are not identical to the people, even if they're intimately interwoven. The reason why that's important is because if we want to know how to fight this battle, tearing down empires will get us nothing.
Amen.
Revolutions will get you just more spirals of violence.
Yep.
What we have to do is target the enemy behind the empires.
Yeah.
And that is the unholy trinity. And there are very key ways to kill that unholy trinity, but they have nothing to do with a sword. They have everything to do with a cross and being willing to be sacrificed. So if we want to win this war, we have to know who the enemy is, and we have to know what weapons actually work against that enemy. So the empire in Revelation is just too small of a target. Like, Eden gave us the target, even if Rome is giving us the grammar with which to engage this. But Rome itself in Revelation, it's collateral damage in a much bigger war. Rome's gonna be destroyed. That's a given. Empires will fall. They don't last forever. We know this through history. We don't know this in our present day because we don't think that everything around us will ever end. But history tells us that the greatest empires to ever exist will fall. That's a given. So don't make that your target. That's small. Instead, do the hard work, like turning your enemy into a friend.
Yeah.
Converting them so that we can obey the love your enemy command for eternity.
Yeah.
Because they're living with us.
Yep. No, it's seeing, like Paul said, who my enemy's never another human. It's spiritual powers and authorities behind the scenes. And I just think that's so important because it's like the specificity, putting the specific lens on Revelation actually causes you to miss the mark of what it's trying to get you to see. And that's that unholy trinity, like you talked about in your book, did so well with the diagrams. I remember that part in the chapter. I'm glad you brought that out because I think it's so important, knowing your enemy. I think it was even the title of that was Uncovering Your Enemy.
Yeah.
We need your help. Ring Them Bells is a nonprofit organization where every dollar donated goes right back into the mission of spreading the good news and helping those in need. The main ministry of Ring Them Bells is serving those in need in the name of our King Jesus. Over the past year, we have fed over 2,000 meals, and next year, we want to double that. We can't do this without your support. Everything we create here and all of the food that we serve is free because it's paid for by generous viewers just like you. If you feel led to donate and join the mission with us here at Ring Them Bells, click the Give Butter link in the notes and comments of this video. If you can't support us financially, please continue to like and share the content, as this helps us so much with spreading the good news about what Jesus has done for our world. So one more thing that I wanted to talk about was 666 or 616, missing the mark of the beast. Let's walk through the mark of the beast, analyzing the dates supposed for Revelation, by analyzing the emperors and then using Gematria to see Rome as the beast and Nero as the mold for the Antichrist. So tell me what you think about that.
Yeah, in the book, I'm super interested in this question of the mark of the beast for obvious reasons, because it seems to be a question that a lot of people are interested in. Through the years, through the decades, we have seen the mark of the beast find its way through church, lore, I guess you could say. First it was the social security number. If you found 666 on your, those numbers in sequence on your social security card or driver's license, you needed to get rid of them. There were rumors that this would be a barcode. And so when barcodes became a thing, I mean, wow, this is definitely the latest technology, and so we need to watch out for it. Through the years, it's kind of morphed into different things. When computers came literally online, we started thinking maybe it's a computer thing, then microchips, tattoos. It was attached to presidential or leaders of countries. Ronald Wilson Reagan, each of his names has 6 letters in it. So he's clearly 666, or if it's Kissinger, or if it's Mikhail Gorbachev, because he had a birthmark on his head, and the mark of the beast is said to be on a forehead. And so he seemed like a candidate as well. My point is to say there were just a ton of different rumors going on. And what it did was, culturally, is it led to a lot of fear, right?
Yeah.
And because people were concerned that they were going to accidentally take the mark of the beast. And so I really wanted to explore that question. Specifically, can you accidentally take this thing? And before I could talk about the mark of the beast, though, I really needed to talk about the beast. So back up just a little bit. In Revelation, you have this dragon. He's really upset. He can't destroy this child that's come to the earth. And so he summons a beast from the earth and a beast from the sea. And this is an echo, of course, to Leviathan and Behemoth of Job. This is an echo of Isaiah 27, verse 1, where Leviathan is mentioned there as a crooked serpent, a twisting serpent. You have other passages, Psalm 74, I believe, talks about Leviathan too. And interestingly, in the Greek Old Testament, Leviathan is sometimes translated as drakon, which is dragon. And drakon is what you get in Revelation. Okay, so you have this dragon figure who summons these beasts, and we want to ask ourselves, okay, well, what is this beast? Specifically, one of the beasts receives a lot of attention here, and this beast is said to have 7 heads. There's questions like, well, what's up with the 7-headed beast? Interestingly, in the Old Testament, you have a sea serpent who has multiple heads, and in antiquity, sometimes you could find a beast with 7 heads. So this is popular imagery of the time, I think, a 7-headed beast. Well, what's interesting is that, and we don't often know this, but John actually tells us exactly how to interpret the 7-headed beast. He tells us in chapter 17 of Revelation that the heads represent 2 things. First, they represent a mountain, so there's 7 hills or 7 mountains. Moreover, each of those heads represent a king. So this is clearly metaphorical imagery. It's meant to point to another reality. It's not meant to draw attention to itself. The beast is a figure, a symbol of something else. And John says it's 7 mountains and 7 kings. And I think back in those days, people would immediately know what he's talking about. Rome was known as the city on 7 hills or 7 mountains, right? There was a yearly festival that celebrated the city of 7 hills, or the 7 mountains, Septimontium. And for example, the Roman historian Suetonius, he talks about this in his biography of the Emperor Domitian. Domitian was ruler in the late 80s and early 90s, which is around the time many scholars think Revelation was written. And so we know that around this time that this was a big deal. And so, moreover, John says that they represent 7 mountains, but each of those heads represent a king, which kind of makes sense because it was in the city of Rome, the 7-hilled city, where the emperor lived in the 1st century. That's where the capital was. So it makes sense why the 7-headed monster would be associated with both kings and the hills. I think John's saying, guys, we're talking about Rome here, okay? You couldn't get much clearer. Now, for us who are 2,000 years removed from this, we would be like, Matt, that's a stretch, right? And I would say it might be for you, but it would not have been for the 1st century. It's kind of like if I go 2,000 years into the future from now, and I get to talk to the people around that time, and I say, hey guys, I'm going to go to the Big Apple tomorrow. They're going to look at me, what's the Big Apple, right? Oh, you don't know what the Big Apple is? Why don't you know the Big Apple? Do you not know your history, American history? Well, no, we don't know. We barely know anything about America. It's been 2,000 years ago. I think the same thing goes here. We know the Big Apple is a reference to New York City, right? And I think that that's what's going on here is that the seven-heeled city was kind of like another way to say the Big Apple. It meant Rome. People just knew that, okay? And so we need to recognize our own limitations, and we need to recognize how the first century readers would have recognized themselves what John was talking about. So, moreover, I also show in the book where or places, and I'm citing a scholar named Mark Wilson in one of his articles. But anyway, there are places outside of Scripture, okay, that call Nero and Domitian, or Nero's called a beast, yeah, and Domitian is too. So now I'm second guessing myself and go back, but I do know Nero is definitely called a beast, and the two were often conflated together.
Yeah.
And no, Domitian is called a beast. Anyway, sorry. And so you have data outside of the biblical narrative that show that this language of beast was often used to talk about these two really corrupt, nefarious emperors. And so maybe, maybe John's doing the same thing. He's using the idea of a beast to refer to, we've already established Rome. And so is he picking out the emperor here? Is he using this language too? We also know from history, Roman history, that Nero was often made fun of by his own citizens, and apparently he just let it go. Nero was very unpredictable. You didn't know if he was going to kill you one minute or just laugh you off. But nonetheless, this sort of thing happened. People would take his name and make fun of him. And the way they would do it, though, was sort of creative. They practice what's called Gematria. And the Gematria is this idea where you take a person's name and you substitute for the letters of the name the numerical equivalent. So let me explain this a little bit more. For English speakers, we have two different types of script. We have a lettered script that we use to write our, we have A, B, C, and D that we use those to write letters, right? But we also have another set of script, Arabic numerals that we use to write numbers, 1, 2, 3. They're just two separate types of script. In Greek, in Latin, and in Hebrew, that wasn't the case. Some languages have to reuse their letters for their numbers. So think of Roman numerals, right? Think of, how, you would take, say in Greek, the first letter of the alphabet would be alpha, and then alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon. So alpha would be number 1. It's also the equivalent letter of A, but it's also for them number 1. Beta is number 2. Alpha, beta, gamma, 1, 2, 3. And so that's the practice of Gematria. So if you could take my name, Matt, and you can find the numerical equivalent to MATT, and have fun with it. Well, we know from history that this is what sometimes happened to Nero. They would make fun of him, right? And use his numerical name. What's interesting is when you go to the Bible, you can make that number 666. You can make it probably mean whatever you want to. It all depends on what name you use, right? But what is interesting, and scholars note this, is that if you take Nero's name, Neron Heiser, okay, Nero Caesar. If you take that name in Greek and you transliterate it into Hebrew, it comes out to 666. Now, that's one way to spell his name, Neron Heiser. If you say Nero Heiser, you drop, instead of saying Neron, you say Nero, you drop one of those letters, you get another number. You get 616. Now, we are familiar with the number 666, but that's actually not the only number in the manuscript history that we have. And if you look and do a deep dive into the manuscript history of Revelation, another number shows up. It's not always 666 in the text. Some would say, some show 616, 616, which some scholars have said that's probably further evidence that the scribes who were transcribing these texts knew exactly who they were talking about, maybe a Nero figure. It's debatable there, but it is very, very interesting in that respect. So so the argument that I give in the book, and I go into much more detail than this.
Hold on one second, just to make that connect, because I think you missed a little link there, is to say that, like,
Okay.
with the 616, what you're saying is that this different spelling is what lines up with that. And that's why, so just explain that a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah. Great point. So 666 can be made to show Neron Caesar. Another way to spell Nero's name is Nero Caesar, but that's 616. And in the manuscript history, we actually have both numbers. Some manuscripts have 666 for the mark of the beast, and then others have 616. Both of those fit in the Nero name pretty darn well. So all to say, I've concluded that the beast is definitely, I'll just say this. It's for John, the symbol of evil. And the most prominent symbol of evil in his day would be Rome. Okay. And so I think that's what's going on here. And so, but now we have the mark of the beast. What's the mark of the beast? Well, this is very interesting too, because I think it fits the data as well. When you go through Revelation and you do I encourage everybody to do this. Go find every reference to mark of the beast. It's always associated with I don't think there's like one instance where it's not, but it's by vast majority of the time, if not, it's always associated with worshiping the beast. Specifically, worshiping the image of the beast. There's a close association between taking the mark of the beast, in other words, and worshiping the beast, the image of the beast. Okay, those two tend to go together. They do in those instances. Okay, so what do we do with that? Well, it's pretty interesting because we have data from that time period that show that Caesar's image was often forced to be worshipped, or at times forced to be worshipped, and just was generally worshipped at that time period. So, for example, you can look to the letters of Pliny. Pliny was a Roman governor of the nearby province Bithynia, which would be next door neighbors to the Asian churches. Okay, next door neighbors to Turkey, and that area. And anyway, and I think the year it was 112 AD. So if Revelation was written in 95, you're looking at just a decade or so difference. Pliny writes back to the emperor of the time, Trajan, and says, "Hey, I've got some Christians. We've arrested them. What's our policy here? With respect to how we punish them, because I'm kind of weeding them out, by making them worship your image, and if they don't, then they're considered obstinate or whatever, and they could die." And so we know that in that time frame, we just kind of look at all the data that you have a beast that's called Caesar, and Caesar is associated with the city of seven hills, Rome. He's clearly associated, it seems, with this weird number 666, or Gematria, I should say. He's associated with Gematria. And now we have instances where the image of the Caesar is worshipped. If you don't worship him, you could die. I mean, we have data supported. If you look at just each one of those by itself, it's like, oh, that's interesting. But when you put all the data together, you have this composite picture that, oh, wait, I think I know what John's talking about here. He's talking about the first century Roman practice of worshiping the Caesars. And so I think that's what's going on with the mark of the beast. But let me say one more tidbit here, because if you notice really carefully, the mark of the beast is associated with buying and selling. Like if you don't have the mark, you will not be able to buy or sell. Okay. So let's unpack that a little bit. But before I get to the economic side, let me just say something about the mark. John is not the first person to talk about marks going on people's bodies. Okay. He's not the first person to do that. And he's not just talking about a mark of the beast. He also has in his letters to the seven churches, he has another mark, what Craig Keener calls the mark of the Lamb. It's really interesting, and we always miss this. So when you read Revelation 13, verses 16 to 18, you have the mark of the beast. But in the very next verse, chapter 14, verse 1, he starts talking about another mark.
Yep, that's right. So the mark is one wonderful example about an imagery, an evocative image that John uses, the mark of the beast. So he's developing the mark and the name of the beast, and having the name. Remember our conversation with Carmen Imes about bearing the name? So having the name upon you, your right hand, and your forehead, these are all images for how faithful Israelites bore the name of Yahweh, said the Shema as a symbol on their hands and their foreheads. And this is all symbolic language about with your mind and with your actions and with your heart. The Shema shows your allegiance to the God of the name. And the beast and the dragon, all they can do is imitate the true God. And so the mark of the beast is, it's an anti-messianic Shema. So what that tells me is that the image has nothing to do about a chimp implant. What it tells me, what is the beast in the Revelation? The beast is a socioeconomic system of oppression and violence. And it seems to me, I am taking the mark of the beast more when I thoughtlessly contribute to or benefit from and don't even become aware of these systems of oppression that I'm part of. That's another equally appropriate way to interpret this, the sign and the number of the beast. And that would be the metaphorical lens approach.
So you have two marks, okay? And the important thing to think about with the mark of the beast is that it doesn't seem to be a mark that makes you righteous or unrighteous. No, it seems to be a mark that shows whether you are righteous or unrighteous. In other words, it's an identity marker. Okay, you get the mark of the beast because you're unrighteous. You have sworn allegiance to Team Beast. You have the mark of the Lamb when you've sworn allegiance to the Lamb. And so we actually can look in the Old Testament and see this really clearly, in fact. In Ezekiel chapter 9, for example, God is about to destroy the temple. But he tells the angel, he says, hey, go off and mark the righteous on the forehead and mark them so that they'll be spared from the judgment that is to come. So that mark on the forehead in Ezekiel is a mark of identification to say, don't destroy this person because they're marked off righteous. Another text from the Jewish antiquity around 100 BC is a text known as the Psalms of Solomon. And in chapter 15 of that text, you have a mark of the righteous and a mark of the unrighteous. And they are marks of identification, it seems there. All to say, when you come back to Revelation 13, it seems like the mark of the beast is a similar sort of thing. It's a mark to identify worshipers of the beast. So this would mean, and why this is important, is that you can't accidentally take this. Because as I said earlier, the mark of the beast is associated with worshiping the image of the beast. It's always associated with that. What that means is basically the mark of the beast just shows that you're a satanic worshiper, right? You can't accidentally be a satanic worshiper. And I mean, yeah. I mean, this seems in the context here to be an act of the will, and so let me get back to the buying and selling thing. So in that time period, you would literally have marks of the beast or Caesar everywhere. You'd have them on statues and images that people worship. They would be in temples. They would be at just local altars down the road and in little streets here and there. They would also be in your pocket in a coin. So on typical Roman coins, you would have the head of a Caesar, and it would have blasphemous sorts of language on it. It would say Caesar, son of the divine one, or something like that, or maybe Caesar Soter, or savior, or whatever, right? And in fact, this was such a big issue that that some Jews, the ones who were really trying to stay faithful to God, they would not even carry Roman money on them because it was considered so blasphemous. It was like the mark of a monster, right? And so in that sense, unless you have the mark of the beast in a coin, you couldn't really buy or sell. Maybe that's what's going on here. Another option that some scholars might point to is in that time you had trade unions, kind of like what we have today. You would join a trade union for economic security or whatnot. And we know that a place like Thyatira, one of the cities Revelation is written to, it was known for having a lot of trade unions. Okay. Think of Acts chapter 19 when Paul is preaching, and he's causing a riot, and Demetrius is really upset because people are not buying images of the gods anymore because they're becoming Christians. He's like, man, you're upsetting the economy here. And it says that he meets with tradesmen, basically trade unionists, to say, we got to stop this guy. And that's actually what would have happened, because these trade unions in Asia, for example, if you wanted to be a member of it, you'd probably have to go to their meetings, of course, which always included, one supposes, a feast. And those feasts would, definitely be dedicated to a deity, probably dedicated to Caesar. We know, for example, that presidents of trade unions often doubled as leaders of the imperial cult. So the imperial cult was like these temples that were dedicated to the worship of Caesar. And I think there's one, I can't think of where it's at off the top of my head, but there's one instance, I think I cited in the book, where we have an inscription that shows that a leader of a trade union was actually also involved with the imperial cult temple. So you have some crossover there. So all to say, I don't think Christians in Asia would have been welcomed or would have felt comfortable at all in a trade union, because they couldn't pray or dedicate their food to Caesar or whatnot. So, there's lots of little ways of understanding this, but you really couldn't buy or sell. You couldn't participate in the economy if you didn't participate in the marks of the beast.
I think that when we read Revelation 17 and 18, and we get all this Babylon stuff, we get all the nations, the many waters, the spiritual adultery, blah, 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 the great whore, and all this stuff. Again, that looks just weird. It looks abstract. It looks like none of these things have any relationship to each other at all, but they all do, because there are ways of describing allegiance to other gods instead of Yahweh. There are ways of describing the Deuteronomy 32 rebellion, all this stuff. I want you to be thinking the rest of the time how Psalm 82 links the judgment of the gods over the nations with not only these themes, but also the whole theme of injustice, social, economic injustice, just the chaos that the gods sow in the nations. Remember Psalm 82, where what is God so angry at the gods for? Now, he has allotted the gods to the other nations. He has abandoned the nations because he's judging them for the whole Tower of Babel episode. He's fragmented them through the languages. We all know the Tower of Babel story, okay? What we miss is the allotment of the gods to the nations and the nations to these other gods. If you've read Unseen Realm, this is old hat by now. Deuteronomy 4:19 through 20, Deuteronomy 17:1 through 3, Deuteronomy 29:23 through 26, you get this allotment language of the host of heaven. The host of heaven are called Elohim in these passages. They are called gods, and these gods have been allotted to the nations. God has taken Israel. This is the language of Deuteronomy 4:19 and 20. He has taken Israel to be his own, and he has judged the other ones. You get to Deuteronomy 32, when the Most High divides up the nations, he divides them up according to the number of the sons of God. Israel is Yahweh's own portion. And again, it's a judgment. And so what happens next in the biblical story is that God says, okay, we're done now. You don't get to set up your own religious system where you build a ziggurat. It's part of a temple complex, and then I come to you and say, what do you want? Okay, you're doing exactly the opposite I told you to do. We repeated the Edenic mandate. You're supposed to disperse all over the earth and reclaim it for me. We're here to try to kickstart Eden again, folks. And you don't seem to get it. Fine. Let's see if you get this. I'm out of here. I am no longer having a relationship with you. I'm going to allot you to these lesser members of the heavenly host. And then next, I'm going to go call this dude Abraham, and his wife, and I'm going to raise up through them a new Adam, a new humanity, a new people for me. Because that's why I started Eden. I want a human family. You don't seem willing, so long. Okay, now we're going to start it again. We're going to do it again. And Abraham and Sarah are perfect because she cannot have children. This is wonderful. Because when I enable her to have a child, no one on the face of the earth is going to be able to deny that the only reason this people exists, Israel, is because of a supernatural act on my behalf. I get the credit. Okay, I'm the creator. Nobody else is. And so this is what God does. Now, when he does it, he makes Abram a promise in Genesis 12, chapter right after Babel, and says, now look, it's going to be, I'm going to promise you all sorts of things. I'm going to give you a land. I'm going to multiply you. You're going to be like the stars. And, and we've had, David Burnett on in the past talking about the star language. It's not just quantity. It refers to a quality that this is the people who are going to be with me in a new Eden. It's the language of glorification. It's not just quantity, but quality. But you know what? Those nations that I just divorced, we're not forgetting them, because one day, just like I told Eve that one day she's going to have a human child, there's going to be a human being that extends from her lineage who will be born, who will undo the effects of this disaster that happened in the Garden of Eden. So just like I told her that, I'm going to tell you something. One of your seed is going to be the key, going to be the conduit through which all of these other nations are going to be brought back into the family. I will have my people from them. Okay, I'm not going to abandon them permanently. They're on the shelf now, but I'm going to use you to bring them back, to bring the nations back. And this is the Old Testament story. Now, what happens is that the gods who are appointed over these other nations, and since God is still interested in them, I mean, if you're a member of some other nation in Old Testament times, there's no rule against you joining Israel, except for one. You must abandon other gods. You must turn your back on all other gods. You must confess that Yahweh is the God of all gods, and that he has entered into a covenant relationship with these people known as Israel. And when I join them, I will worship no other. I will trust no other. I will presume that no other deity will, rescue me from Sheol. I will presume that he is the God of all gods, and that only he is capable of rescuing me from death, ultimately. This is what you must believe, and there's no rule against anybody believing it. We know that there are pagans and Gentiles in the Old Testament who come over, they switch sides. There's no barrier to that other than turning their backs on their gods. So, this is what's going on. Well, the gods of the nations, their strategy becomes, okay, well, we'll just seduce Yahweh's people into abandoning him. We're going to turn them into idolaters. And the people under our charge, we're going to enslave them. We're going to make them dependent on us. We're going to sow so much chaos in their lives. We're going to sow so much fear in their lives that they're going to be so paralyzed with fear that they wouldn't think of leaving us, because we'll retaliate. We'll destroy them. It's a fear-based, power-based, abuse-based, chaos-based system. And if you read Psalm 82, this is what you get in verses 2 through 5. This is what they're doing, and this is why God is angry. So I want you to be thinking about all that as a background, because when you head into the rest of Revelation 17 and 18, there are a number of places where it describes the economic, injustice. And what I mean by that is ways that those who hold power enslave people economically through what they can eat, through what they own or what they don't own. They create economic dependence on this. You go to Revelation 17, 1 through 2, come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters. With the kings of the earth, they have committed sexual immorality. Okay, so they hold the power brokers in their hands, okay? You get to Revelation 18, 2 and 3. That's Revelation 17. Here's Revelation 18, 2 and 3. Let's just go to verse 1. Then after this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority. The earth was made bright with his glory. And he called out with a mighty voice, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable beast. For all nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality, And the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth. They're now all of a sudden we throw in the merchants. Again, the people who will use wealth to victimize and enslave others, okay? The merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living. So there we add the economic element. You keep reading in chapter 18, you get to verse 5. We see it again. For her sins, Babylon's sins are heaped up, and God her iniquity. She herself and back others. Repay her deeds, mix a double portion for her in the cup she mixed. As she glorified herself and lived in luxury, so give her like a measure of torment and mourning, since in her heart she says, I sit as a queen, I am no widow. The mourning I shall never see. M-O-U-R. She's not going to see disaster. For this reason, her plagues will come in a single day, death and mourning and famine. She will be burned up with fire, for mighty is the Lord God who has judged her. You go down a little bit further. You get verses 10 through 17. Look at how Babylon is described. Alas, you great city, you mighty city Babylon, for in a single hour your judgment has come. And the merchants, there they are again, of the earth, weep and mourn for her, since no one buys their cargo anymore, cargo of gold, silver, jewels, pearls, fine linen, purple cloth, silk, scarlet cloth, all kinds of scented wood. There's just a long grocery list of spices. This is the economic center because Babylon was the dominant world empire. Okay, let me just be real simple. It's like Thomas Jefferson said. Okay, the more that the government gives you, the more it can take away. Okay, when you are under its authority, when you are dependent on it, it will strangle you. You have now given it the power to crush you and to control you and manipulate you. This is what, we live in America, but we're still fond of saying, things like, and it's true. When is the last time government surrendered power? It doesn't. And this is why economic power and other kinds of manipulative power are used in the Bible, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, and here in Revelation. Revelation picks up all these themes. I'm reading the book of Revelation, reading Revelation 18. So this is why these things are referenced, because when a system of power owns you, you're trapped. Okay, you're going to suffer greatly to ever get out from under it. It will not allow it. It will not tolerate you excusing yourself from the arrangement. It owns you. And it's an abuse of power. It's an opportunity for chaos. It's an opportunity to exploit and destroy. And this is why the book of Revelation casts Babel in these economic terms, and that goes right back to Psalm 82. It goes right back there. This is the kind of abuse of people that God does not want. God is not in favor of coercive, abusive power exercised by people over other people, and he's not in favor of it because ultimately, when it is evil and coercive and abusive, ultimately, the ones driving the bus aren't necessarily the human power brokers, because behind the human power brokers, there's a more sinister intelligence that wants to destroy, that wants to enslave, that wants you to worship them. This is why the nations, both in Psalm 82, Revelation, and lots of other passages. There's tons of passages like this in the Old Testament. This is why the nations are described this way and why the gods of those nations get looped into it. It's all one huge, chaotic, evil system that is aligned against, ultimately, the people of God. So, why, again, let's go back to the why question. This is what I think it's really about, because where's all this leading? Chapters 15, 16, 17, 18. Well, 19, we're going to get, we're going to get Armageddon. We're going to get the return of the Lord. We're going to get the day of the Lord, enacted. We're going to get all this evil. We're going to get the beast dealt with. Now think of it this way. If this is really about God against the nations, if this is really about the Psalm 82 judgment of the gods, the death of the gods, finally coming to pass. Think about the purpose of that. Think about the purpose of that. Revelation 17 is an integral part of the day of the Lord judgment of the gods and the reclaiming of the earth. Why? For the reinheritance of the Messiah. The earth is going to be wiped clean of chaos. The earth is being readied again to be sacred space for the true God and the King. That is ultimately what this is about. The earth must be made fit. Okay? It must be made fit for the reoccupation of the true King in a new Eden with his own family and his reconstituted council going back to Eden, and that's us. So again, we need to pay attention to the theological backdrop behind all of these sorts of descriptions. It's not about who has the best weaponry. It's not about who has the best army. It's ultimately about the gods getting what they deserve, the beast getting what it deserves. It's about the annihilation of chaos. Chaos must be annihilated. It must be eliminated in totality. Because this time, when the Lord returns, chapter 19, okay, he's going to be occupying a new Eden. And in this case, the new Eden is global. The whole world, every nation, every square inch of the place has to be readied and retooled, refit to be sacred space because he is showing up. Okay, he is reoccupying. So again, we need to think a little bit bigger picture about these things. I know they look strange, they look disparate, they look like they're not related. They're all related. They all fit together. Again, if you can take the bird's eye view and look down and look where John is drawing all this stuff, and the key here is the Babylon. The key here is the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. And then the imagery makes sense, and the end game makes sense. The ultimate conflict, as the players are taking sides, they make sense.
The apostles said that humanity's real enemy is never another human. Rather, it's the spiritual powers that animate our cultural idols that inspire hatred, division, and violence.
So when I see people hurting other people, behind it is the divine council gone rogue. How do you deal with this kind of enemy?
Well, the Apostle Paul said we can resist by putting on the character traits of Jesus like armor, faithfulness, justice, and peace. And he said that our only weapon is the Word of God. That is, the biblical story of good news that Jesus has overcome all rebels with the divine power of his life and love.
We as Gentiles and followers of different nations have been grafted back into the family of God. The Satan, these demons, the rebellious Elohim have no authority over us as we serve the true King Jesus. It is our participation in finding ourselves within this story that frees us from these dark powers. That victory is offered to you right here in this moment. The only cost is allegiance to the one true King Jesus. We do this with the proclamation of his rule and authority over all nations and all powers in this world. You can do this with us and join this growing community here at Ring Them Bells. We are a global collective of redeemed individuals who pledge our allegiance to Jesus and Jesus alone. We invite you into this community. We would love for you to subscribe, like, share, join this community, follow along with us as we follow the one true King. So turn on your alerts and stay tuned. As always, the beginning is near.